The church doors swung open, and a hush fell over the small crowd gathered on the steps. They carried her out carefully, her arms wrapped protectively around her baby, a fragile little bundle that seemed far too small for the weight of the world.
Are you alright?
Her heart pounded with shame and fear, but she kept her gaze downward, trying to disappear into the cold air. Whispers followed her like shadows, some curious, some judgmental, some cruel. No one reached out to help, no one offered a comforting word. Everyone had eyes, but none had empathy. Her baby stirred, letting out a soft whimper, and she clutched him tighter. The warmth of his tiny body was the only comfort she could hold on to, the only thing keeping panic from consuming her. The streets were emptying as people retreated behind the doors of nearby buildings, leaving her exposed and alone in the fading winter sunlight. She took an unsteady step forward, her coat heavy and stiff from the cold, the snow crunching under her boots. Her mind raced with questions. What would she do now? Where would she go? How could she survive with no one willing to see her as more than a shameful story? Then, just as her knees threatened to buckle, a hand touched her shoulder gently. She flinched, ready to retreat, ready to defend herself from yet another stranger's pity or judgment. But the touch wasn't harsh. It was steady, warm, and patient. She looked up and met the eyes of a man kneeling beside her. His suit was tailored, expensive, his polished shoes reflecting the dim light of the street lamps. But it wasn't the wealth in his appearance that struck her, it was the kindness in his gaze, the lack of condescension, the silent promise that he wasn't here to judge. "I'm sorry you've been through this," he said softly. His voice was calm, yet firm, like a steady anchor in a stormy sea. "You don't have to face this alone." She wanted to argue, to push him away, to retreat back into the cocoon of isolation she had built around herself. But she couldn't. Something about his presence felt different. It wasn't pity she saw in his eyes, it was concern, a genuine human connection she hadn't felt in months. The baby, sensing the change, snuggled closer against her chest, letting out a quiet sigh. The man smiled, not in a way that made her feel embarrassed or exposed, but in a way that whispered, "It's going to be okay." Around them, the crowd had mostly disappeared. The murmurs faded into the distance, leaving the church steps quiet except for the crunch of snow under boots and the soft coos of her baby. For the first time in what felt like forever, a fragile thread of hope touched her heart. Perhaps someone could see her not as a scandal, not as a burden, but as a person who deserved help. The man didn't rush her. He stayed on one knee, matching her level, giving her space while silently offering support. His patience and the quiet strength in his presence made her realize she wasn't entirely alone. For the first time, she felt the possibility of safety, even if just for a moment. And in that instant, amidst the cold, judgmental world outside, she dared to imagine a future where she and her baby could breathe freely again. He stayed kneeling beside her on the church steps, his presence steady, calm, and unexpectedly comforting. "You don't have to face this alone," he said again, his voice soft but firm, carrying a quiet authority that made her heart flutter with confusion. She had spent weeks, maybe months, believing that the world had nothing but cold judgment for her. And now, here was a stranger, well-dressed, confident, and yet somehow gentle, offering help without question, without scrutiny. Her baby squirmed slightly in her arms, letting out a tiny whimper, and she adjusted him against her chest, unsure whether to trust this man. I don't know what you mean," she whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled, not patronizingly, but with a warmth that made her feel safe. "I mean that you and your child deserve care, warmth, and protection. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less." He glanced down at the baby, who had already quieted, seemingly sensing the lack of fear in his tone. "He's beautiful," he said simply, as if stating a fact too obvious to need embellishment. She blinked back tears, unsure if they were from relief, embarrassment, or hope. Perhaps all three. Around them, the crowd had begun to thin, the murmurs fading into a distant hum. People had gone back to their routines, leaving her standing there exposed, yet no longer entirely alone. She noticed small details, the soft fall of his tailored coat over his knees, the way he kept his distance yet didn't let her feel abandoned, the patience in his posture. She had forgotten how it felt to be seen without judgment, to have someone acknowledge her pain without making her feel small. He extended his hand slowly, a gesture of trust rather than command. "Come with me," he said simply. "You need a safe place tonight. Somewhere your baby can sleep without fear, and you can breathe." Her instinct screamed at her to decline, to run, to protect herself from yet another potential disappointment. And yet, there was something in his presence that felt undeniably genuine. The way he spoke, the way he didn't rush her or demand explanations, made her feel almost human again. Almost worthy. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the blanket wrapped around her baby. "And why would you help me?" she asked finally. "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. "No one should face the world like this alone. And because I can." For the first time in months, a spark of hope flickered in her chest. The world had seemed impossibly cold, cruel even, but here was someone proving otherwise. She allowed herself to nod, barely, but it was enough. He rose to his feet and offered his arm, not as a show of power, but as support. She took it cautiously, her baby nestled securely in her arms. And together, they walked down the church steps into the unknown night, the city lights stretching ahead of them, the first faint traces of hope guiding her forward. The car glided through the quiet streets, the city lights flickering past like distant stars reflected on the dark windows. She sat in the back seat, her baby resting peacefully in her arms, and tried to steady her racing thoughts. The millionaire beside her said little, but his calm presence was reassuring. She didn't know his name, didn't know anything about him beyond the fact that he had appeared when the world had seemed ready to abandon her. And yet, despite the strangeness of it all, she felt a flicker of trust, small, fragile, but persistent. As they arrived at the mansion, her breath caught in awe. The house was enormous, more like a palace than a home, with soft lights glowing in every window and the front garden meticulously landscaped. Despite its grandeur, it didn't feel cold or unwelcoming. He opened the car door for her, his movements careful, unhurried, and considerate of her every step. She took in the sprawling foyer, its marble floors gleaming, the chandeliers casting warm, golden light. The silence wasn't intimidating, it was comforting in a way she hadn't expected. He led her through the hallways, past rooms she could only dream of, libraries filled with books, sitting areas with plush furniture, and walls adorned with art that made her feel like she had stepped into another world. Finally, he stopped at a door and gestured for her to enter. She hesitated, then opened it to find a room designed for a child, soft blankets, a crib, colorful toys scattered across the floor, and gentle lighting that created a safe cocoon. For the first time since the chaos at the church, she felt her shoulders relax. Her baby cooed softly, stretching tiny arms, and she let out a sigh she didn't realize she had been holding. "I wanted you to have a place where he feels safe," he said quietly, remaining near the doorway. "And where you can rest without fear." Her throat tightened, emotion welling up so fast she could hardly speak. She nodded, words failing her. It was more than a room, it was an unspoken promise, a sanctuary from the judgmental world outside. She laid the baby gently on the blankets, watching him explore his new surroundings, his curiosity lighting up his tiny face. The man stayed quietly in the background, observing without intruding, offering help when needed but never overstepping. Hours passed, and she slowly explored the mansion, feeling both overwhelmed and strangely at peace. He showed her the basics she would need: where to sleep, where the baby's essentials were stored, and how to access food and supplies. But he did it gently, never making her feel small or incapable. It was clear he wanted her to feel empowered, not indebted. And as the night deepened, she realized how utterly alone she had felt before this moment, and how profoundly different it was to have someone act with kindness without expectation. Sitting in the nursery, watching her baby drift to sleep under the soft glow of the lamp, she felt a quiet strength returning. For the first time in months, the future seemed less frightening. She didn't know what would happen next, but she trusted that she and her child were no longer alone in the world, and that trust, fragile though it was, could be the beginning of a life rewritten. Days turned into weeks, and life in the mansion slowly settled into a new rhythm. She woke each morning to the soft sounds of her baby's laughter, echoing like sunlight across the rooms, and the quiet footsteps of the millionaire moving through the house, always present but never intrusive. He offered guidance when needed, support without expectation, and above all, patience. Slowly, she began to see herself not as a burden, not as a cautionary tale, but as a mother capable of protecting and nurturing her child. The small victories, feeding her baby, keeping him warm, watching him take his first steps, were now shared victories, celebrated quietly but deeply. He helped her navigate the world outside the mansion's walls. They visited local stores, found childcare, and even arranged for a small job that would allow her independence. He never imposed, never demanded, but he ensured she had the tools she needed to rebuild. Each time she struggled, he was there, not to take over, but to steady her, offering gentle guidance. And every night, when the house was quiet and the baby asleep, she would find him quietly checking on them, his presence a reassuring shadow in the soft lamplight. Trust, fragile as it had been at first, grew steadily. She found herself laughing again, a sound that startled her with its rarity, and she noticed her baby smiling more, his tiny eyes sparkling with curiosity and joy. She realized that the world wasn't as cruel as it had seemed, that kindness existed in forms she hadn't expected, and that people could care without judgment. The millionaire's patience and respect had created a safe space where life could thrive again, and it was in that safety that she began to hope, truly hope, for the first time in months. One evening, as she watched her baby crawl across the soft carpet, she felt a quiet gratitude swell in her chest. He had given them shelter, security, and the freedom to begin again. But more than that, he had shown her that compassion existed in the world, that even in the darkest moments, human connection could illuminate a path forward. She looked at him, sitting quietly in the corner with a soft smile, and realized that life could be rewritten. It wasn't a fairy tale, and she knew challenges still lay ahead. But for the first time, she understood that she and her child could face them, together. And though their bond had begun in desperation, it had grown into something stronger, a partnership built on trust, kindness, and a shared understanding that family wasn't always defined by blood. As the moonlight filtered through the windows, casting gentle shadows across the room, she cradled her baby and let herself relax. Life had changed, radically, unexpectedly, but it was no longer a life defined by fear. It was a life defined by hope. And in that hope, she found a future worth stepping into, a future where she could smile, laugh, and love again. The millionaire remained quietly nearby, a steadfast presence, proving that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could change everything. In the warmth of the mansion, surrounded by safety and care, she understood that their story was only beginning, and that sometimes, salvation came not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, unwavering support of someone who simply cared.